Hello and welcome to the RotoViz Best Ball Show. My name is Colm Kelly. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host on the show. It is Zachary Krueger, and we're delighted to be joined today by Chris Spags, who you can follow on Twitter at Chris Spags, and you can also check him out on the Splash Play podcast. He was on there with the great Peter Overzet as well. But I mentioned this before we started recording to Chris, but I've wanted to do a show for quite some time, and it can be difficult sometimes, even though we do as much content as we do, it can be difficult to fit them all in because you're trying to get your own content done and everything as well. So we're really happy to be jumping on here and talking with Chris. So the first thing to do is welcome him into the show here before we jump into the draft lobby.
No, thank you guys for having me. I'm excited to do it. I know, I've been toiling away in the best ball coal mines the last few months to finally get enough credibility to get on a RotoViz stream. But reading all your guys' articles, I know Dubner's been doing a great job. Colin over there is doing also a lot of great work, sending me really all of his articles. So I know exactly what Drico's doing, or Drico, I guess, is the proper way to phrase him for a guy who's won a lot of money. You have to give him the proper honorations. But I'm excited to be on with you guys, and really to give you guys the credit you deserve as being a real thought leader ahead of this, where I feel like best ball, I'm kind of riding the coattails of all the work you guys have done, making people smarter about this stuff. And now it's like it's blown up in a huge way. I know you guys passed 1,000 subs, so I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and I guess, that's a good thing to lead off on. We did hit 1,000 subs on YouTube on Sunday, so this is kind of a celebratory live stream to kick things off. And yeah, best ball has really taken off over the last particular 12 months. Underdog Fantasy have done a massive part of that. But yeah, we have been at the best ball kind of streets for a long time now with the FFPC in particular. But yeah, it has really taken off over the last 12 months or so, and that's a lot of fun for us, a lot of fun for people drafting. Quick plug at the start of the show: if you are drafting over at underdogfantasy.com, you can use the code RotoViz to get a 100% sign up bonus up to $100 to get you into some of these drafts. But we will be jumping in to an Underdog Puppy draft in a couple of moments. Zach will be setting us up there behind the scenes. We'll be sharing the draft board and so on as we go through that. Zach, how are you doing today as we get ready to draft here?
I'm doing great, guys. Excited to be on here. You mentioned earlier we get 1,000 subs on RotoViz. I'm assuming that Colm's going to be a little bit too humble to do this, so I'm going to go ahead and do it for him. He has been absolutely grinding this channel as of late, really promoting it online on Twitter. He sends me DMs like every day of just like different like screenshots he's put together to really kind of help drive this thing up here. So hat tip to Colm for really kind of grinding to get the subs to where they are right now. They would not be here without all the effort you put in. So I want to make sure you get the credit there. But outside of that, just looking forward to drafting some more best ball teams and kind of really continue to dive headfirst in the best ball season and get the show on the road. So I'm looking forward to doing this, looking forward to drafting with Spags, and having guests, to kind of break up some of the conversation between Colm and myself. So it'll be a good time.
Yeah, the less myself and you, Zach, talk, maybe the better on this show. We'll put the pressure on the Chris to get his thoughts. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. We've done a couple of drafts both for YouTube and for the podcast format over the last month or so. So this is the first time jumping into the puppy. But anyone that's looking to enter this that hasn't entered yet, $5 entry, $75,000 top prize. So yeah, lots of fun. If you're just dipping your toes into best ball for the first time, there is no real better way to do it. The price point of $5 over at the Underdog Fantasy, it's really one that you can kind of sit in and dip your toes in and not. I think 10 years ago, we were trying to find sites to do mock drafts. Sean mentioned recently on the Zero RB Origin podcast for some computer software he was using to draft against other computer teams. And this is kind of the best way to do it now, because I know it's $5, but there is stakes involved and you're getting truer ADP and things like that. So we're going to have fun drafting this. Chris, as we start off, where are you looking to go? We don't know our draft slot yet as the draft is filling, as you can see from the screen in front of us, but waiting on one team. Where's your ideal draft slot in these drafts?
I mean, I generally, I feel like I get either the 1 or the 10 lately in the puppy, and I've done about 20 entries so far, and it's filling up really fast. So that's something I've been trying to do is like, with the barbell approach, I know you guys advocate for a lot on RotoViz. I've been doing that with Best Ball Mania, where it definitely crammed in, 70 entries in Best Ball Mania. Now I'll hopefully dial that back until the home stretch of that part. But the puppy, you just got to jam them in now because they're probably going to fill. I mean, last year they filled 3. It seems like this year maybe they could fill 4 or maybe 5, I guess. So it's a little bit of a different approach overall, where I think, you're just trying to get the ADP value, certainly trying to be tethered to those as best you can, but really just being prepared for some absolutely insane rooms is what I've seen so far.
And we are, Jennifer Eakins has popped up that she says she's in drafting with us. So this should be a fun draft here as we go. But we do pop the number 1 overall spot. And, you mentioned some of the slots you've had. I drafted at the end of last week from the 111, which was a lot of fun. When you're doing podcasts, I have said in the past that getting the 105, 106, 107 is a lot better. It gives you that little bit of breathing room between picks because it does come pretty quick. But we'll be going back to back at the start of each round. So we'll have time to talk through it after we pick in the first round here. But where are you thinking? My pick is Jonathan Taylor when you have the 101. I have taken Cooper Kupp in some drafts. I've taken Christian McCaffrey, but I think when you have the 101, I think getting, let's say we'll say modified 0 RB, but that anchor RB or that legendary RB to start off your draft. What are you thinking, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the approach I am. Wherever you're at the 101, it's just you got to take the guy who, certainly should have the touchdown equity. I think Matt Ryan being a pretty big improvement over where Carson Wentz was last year should also be a positive for what he's doing. There's certainly some ways, I know they brought in Philip Lindsay, also brought in Tyson Williams within the last week to theoretically try to compete for that backup role. But I feel like if you're getting the 101, that's the only way you're going to get even close to the Fields, Jonathan Taylor, exposure. So I feel like if he's there, you just got to take him when you can get him.
Yeah, and it's interesting as well. I've talked about this on other drafts when you're going with a kind of 0 RB approach. If you don't take a wide receiver sometimes at that 101, getting back at the 212, the options can be very limited at wide receiver. There's some of the drafts that I've done this year when you have those first 3 to 4 picks, it can be very hard if you don't take a wide receiver there to get your options then at wide receiver at the back end of the round. I think the sweet spot is that kind of 5th, 6th, 7th spot to be able to really set your team up with that wide receiver start. But we'll see how things play out here moving forward. Zach, you'll be keeping us up to date on who you have at the top of the queue in terms of ADP, but who are some of your favorite, I guess we'll say, not Jonathan Taylor targets, Chris, if we're in the first or second rounds here?
I would say from my perspective, what you're talking about being in the 5 hole, I think is pretty nice because then you're getting whichever one of these guys fall. And I think it's a pretty big tier break to me, in terms of Taylor, Kupp, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and McCaffrey. I'm probably a little bit less sold on than everybody else. I certainly get the logic that if he's healthy and he's running good and that offense is what it is, he's going to be probably the 101 most years. But I think you have enough questions with just, what he's been doing these last 2 years. Certainly a thing that alarms me is whenever guys get a little bit too into being influencers. And that's certainly where he's been with his dating a former Miss USA. And then he's posting really corny photos all the time. These are things that are not data points that are going to be important to RotoViz normally. But I would say from my perspective, if somebody tries to blend it all together, if you get to that 1-5 spot, you could take McCaffrey. But the one place I don't want to be is where you're taking Derrick Henry or you just feel like you have to take him because he's now 4 spots behind ADP. And that's really, to me, the worst place you want to be. You want to be either that top 5 or getting a Diggs, a Devontae Adams, or one of the tight ends. And Henry, I think if you're taking him in that first round, you are, I wouldn't say dead in the water, but about as close to it as you can get.
Yeah, it can be tricky in that spot. We did actually that draft that I mentioned from the 111. It was myself and Sean Siegel, and we took Najee Harris there, who is somebody who I don't think that we're going to, I don't think I'm going to draft a lot of, but there is an interesting debate with the volume he's going to get, and there should be an improvement in that offense with, Ben Roethlisberger last year was very, very poor, and I think this offense should be better for the Steelers this year, even with the changes, and even if it is Mitchell Trubisky that's in there at quarterback. But he's somebody who's interesting at the back end of the first round. But really and truly, you mentioned there kind of the tier break, because Devontae Adams is a fair pick, but in that draft, Devontae Adams was gone. We were into the situation where our options were kind of CeeDee Lamb or Deebo Samuel. We did take Deebo Samuel in the second round, but the back end of that first round has a lot of question marks around it as well. So when we're getting into the second round, Zach, who is your prime target here if somebody could fall to us? Do you think there's any chance the likes of an AJ Brown might slip down there? T. Higgins, who are you looking to target as the back end here at the 212?
Yeah, so you just kind of mentioned 2 guys who have ADPs of 24.8 and 25.3 in Brown and Higgins. So those are 2 very realistic targets for us who I think could fall here. I think, being overly optimistic, we would hope for something like Mark Andrews even falls to us, but that's probably not going to happen. He's got about a mid-second ADP. So I don't see that happening. I mean, obviously, we kind of know as Team RotoViz that the goal in these drafts that we want to do is load up on wide receivers. So if we don't get one of these elite tight ends here, then it's really just going to, I think, at least for myself, going to be about trying to hammer some of these wide receivers and get in some guys who we like. I really do obviously like T. Higgins. I don't think that's a very contrarian take at this point in time in his career as he heads into year 3. So I like him. I do have him in the queue here. We're actually I'll go ahead and pull it up because we have to pick back-to-back picks here, guys. So let me see if I can refresh this here.
Pressure's going to come on pretty quick, Ellis.
Yeah, it gets like quick out here. So we have back-to-back picks. Who are some other guys we want to go ahead and just get into this queue for the sake of making sure we're prepared on the turn?
I wouldn't kind of reach for Pitts here. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but I know the elite tight end build is one that I know you guys have been imparting to me. Every RotoViz article kind of impresses the importance of getting that first tight end in, hopefully first 5 rounds, at least first 7. So to me, Pitts, I think it's relative to ADP, probably gonna be the closest we're going to get.
Yeah, I think it could be interesting. I'm saying at the draft slot, the perfect draft slot and how things play out. A lot of the guys that, like Sean is very much in on TJ Hawkinson this year. I really like Hawkinson. There is that elite tight end element, but when we're drafting here at this spot, it's going to be tricky for us to get some of the options that we may normally target. So we do have AJ Brown, we do have T Higgins as options. We do have Kyle Pitts as well. Out of AJ Brown and T Higgins, I think we should take one of them, and I think it should be AJ Brown. I'll let you make the final call on that pick, Chris.
I'm okay taking both receivers here, honestly, just because there is a little bit of breathing room here, and it does feel, the ADPs on Brown and Higgins look good. So I think we could do Brown and Higgins if you guys want to do that approach.
Well, let's do it. I think that'll be fun. I think it's a good combination to pair both of those guys with, Jonathan Taylor to start things off. I wouldn't have been against taking a tight end there. Now the wait will be to see what options do come back to us here in the 4th and 5th round. So, hopefully the likes of a Kittle, a Waller, or maybe even Hawkinson do get back there. I think Hawkinson's probably the most likely. So we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, Pitts, I think, is somebody who people are disappointed with, how his rookie season went based on perception of what his rookie season would be. But as a rookie tight end, it was an immense season. That offense had a lot of problems. They obviously lost Calvin Ridley and so on. So I think heading into this season, I think there is a little bit of, even though his ADP is high, I think there's a little bit of a discount there being built in by people's perception of him versus the likes of Kelsey and Andrews. Andrews heading into last season was really in the spot that maybe George Kittle is in right now, based on it didn't really work out for him perfectly the year before. We see in this draft, Travis Kelsey and Mark Andrews go back-to-back picks in the mid-second round. So we'll see how it plays out. But what are you thinking, Zach, now as we start off with Jonathan Taylor, T. Higgins, and AJ Brown? I'm interested to see that. I know it doesn't really matter, but any reason you took T. Higgins over AJ Brown in this draft?
Over here?
AJ Brown, just in terms of the order you selected them in.
Oh, well, for Higgins, I just really like the fact that the Bengals are definitely going to be playing in more of probably more aggressive passing offense, so what we can expect for the Eagles here. And then number 2, just the fact that I prefer Burrow as a quarterback over Jalen Hurts. I think that what he does on the field is very limited to something only a few quarterbacks can do. So I kind of want to be able to get those wide receivers that are tethered to those elite quarterbacks whenever I can. I actually recently had done an article. I don't know if this is your segueing into this column just creatively without saying it or not, but I did recently do an article on high volume rushing quarterbacks and their effects that they have on wide receivers and tight ends for fantasy purposes. And one of the things that the article kind of uncovered was how difficult it is for some of these wide receivers tethered to these high volume rushing quarterbacks to hit top 12 wide receiver status. So just from that perspective alone, the numbers would suggest that Higgins is probably the safer bet to return value on ADP. Brown, it may be a little bit tougher for, which I also think kind of leads me to also thinking that Devonta Smith of the Eagles may be a value later on in this draft as well, something else to consider. But for me, it's just Higgins and the volume that he receives in a high-powered Cincinnati Bengals offense that it has an excellent quarterback in there as well. So for me, it's just Higgins over Brown by a slight margin, I think.
Yeah, I really like Brown. I think there's a little bit of a discount going into people's perception of the Eagles, and I think that like his efficiency over the years, like he hasn't really had a huge amount of work compared to other wide receiver ones, but I'm still very excited about him heading into this season, and I'm obligated to say that in case Ben Gretsch is listening into the podcast, the number one AJ Brown fan out there. We will be getting back to our pick in a second, but Tom Strachan did post in a comment. He said, if you are in the 101 and take Taylor when it comes back to you, and all you have is 2 running back options without reaching 4 to 5 spots in ADP, what are you doing? He does follow up with a comment a couple of times. I felt like the draft board has forced me to consider a robust running back, but he isn't paying the rake. But when we've talked about a few drafts recently, I do feel like at the back end of that second round, early third round, a lot of the time you are left with running back options versus the wide receiver options. And in this draft, we have been very fortunate, I think, to get the option to stack those two younger wide receivers. So that worked out well for us, but definitely understand what Tom's saying there. In terms of who you have in the queue, Zach, we have Marquise Brown, we have Cortland Sutton, Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow, both stacking options, and then Dalton Schultz and TJ Hawkinson. George Kittle is there as well at tight end. I don't know if you have a preference for him, Chris, but when we're looking here at our options, as we are 3 picks away, what are you looking in here with potential stacking options and also the elite tight end to add in? I would be going with Kittle or Hawkinson and over Schultz, to be honest, but we also have the options at quarterback and wide receiver in Cortland Sutton.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be reluctant to reach for Schultz or Hawkinson just because I'm normally getting those guys in the 6th or 7th round if they go there. To me, this is a Kittle spot. I think we take him. The issue is that the way that this board kind of broke for us is we don't have that week 17 correlation, which is something I'm really trying to push, especially in the puppy, because you just see people and, think it's the puppy and DraftKings best ball where people are just not paying attention at all to week 17 correlations. But the spot, I've been ending up with a lot of Vegas, San Francisco week 17 correlations. And I think the Kittle part of that, is really where that comes in most easily is you get Adams, you can get Waller, you can get Kittle, you can get a bunch of different configurations there. But for us, I'm not seeing anything that's super logical here for the 2nd pick. So I might just take another receiver if you wanted to go that way.
Yeah, I think I would lean receiver, but the options are very limited.
Make a pick here. We got 10 seconds.
Yeah. You take executive order. Let's go with Rashad Bateman. That's a better
Bateman. All right.
Let's jump. It is a way ahead of ADP. How many picks ahead of ADP did we go there?
I mean, Matt Harmon was touting him a little bit, saying the reception perception stuff, which he's been really good with. I think he called out Deontay Johnson earlier than anybody else in the industry was really touting him. He said Bateman grades out about as well as anybody who's a year 2 receiver that he's seen in the last, I think, 5 years. So there's some reason to reach on Bateman. It's tough when you are in that back-to-back pick range because you really have to decide, am I going to just completely upset the ADP or, and take a guy that you actually want, or do you just kind of follow the ADP? And Pete's talked to me a lot. Pete Overzet's talked to me a lot, and just kind of following the ADPs here. So I might have gone with an Amari Cooper, but is Bateman a better play than Cooper? Probably.
He is. It's factually correct that he is.
I think that Bateman, Marquise Brown is gone from that offense, and for as low volume passing as the Ravens have been, the one position, well, I guess the 2 positions, because you have to definitely include Mark Andrews in that, but then the other position that's been very valuable for fantasy, at least in terms of, what we're looking for volume is that wide receiver 1 spot. I think Brown has had roughly a 22 to 23% target share, if not better, in each of his seasons in Baltimore. So I'm kind of hopeful that maybe some of that target volume is going to kind of naturally go over to Bateman's way, and that even if they're a lower volume passing attack, that's still going to be Bateman who's kind of commanding that 23-24% target share, which will probably have some ups and downs because it's still going to be a relatively low volume passing attack overall, I think. But Bateman at this spot, we're almost certain to not get him on the bring back, so he's someone who we like over the other wide receivers there, which I know for Colm's sake it probably was. Then I think Bateman was probably fine there. It was about a 9-pick reach, which I don't think is.
Yeah. And I was joking about the Amari Cooper part, but I'm off Amari Cooper this year, basically 100%. I think that he's an aging receiver who the Cowboys just wanted no part of on a very low value, not a low value contract, but versus other wide receiver contracts. But if you look at the other guys didn't do much last year, showed some flashes, but we can see opportunities. We can see that the other wide receiver 1 has been moved out of town. Lots of opportunities. You look then at Allen Robinson, veteran aging wide receiver who changed teams. Juju Smith-Schuster, wide receiver who's changed teams, veteran as well, hasn't done a lot. Then we look at Amari Cooper, next guy off the board, similar. Then we have Gabriel Davis, who had a massive game against the Chiefs, but over his whole season didn't have a huge thing. We have Brandon Cooks, we have Chris Godwin, who's likely to miss a good portion of the start of the season. So it was a reach, but I think in terms of profile, he's the guy I'm targeting there. Derek Brown with a shout out that Bateman is a baller. I also enjoyed his comment that Zach is only paying attention to running backs. And Jennifer did mention that some of us are certainly paying attention to week 17. So she's drafting with us here. So we're looking at that correlation as well. But I do think that when we look through it, and I think to your point, Chris, when we're drafting in these teams, and I touched on it earlier about the $5 entry point, there will be some people who aren't trying to piece together all those parts. And I think that's what you were touching on more so there. So I think overall we're in a pretty good spot here starting off the draft. the dream scenario is that one of those quarterbacks come back to us at this turn, which at the moment it does look like that because Kyler Murray, the only quarterback that has gone off the board since our last pick. How are you feeling, Chris, as we get here? Who have we set up? Actually, flip it back to the queue for 2 seconds, Zach. Do we see who?
Yeah, we're 4 picks away. So
and how are you feeling then, Chris, with where we should go here?
Let's see. So I think, I'm obviously going to be happy if we get one of the QBs to fall. Jalen Hurts, I feel like going ahead of Burrow is one of those things. I know the rushing upside is there, but in terms of a stack, I think I'd probably rather have Burrow. And Burrow's price is so so varied, so variable where, like, I know he's going, I think he was going to the 41 spot in some of the $1 DK tournaments people were saying. And that's like incredibly lofty, but he'll sometimes fall to the 7th round. And I know that's the QB zone I've read a lot of RotoViz articles kind of talk about. So I'd rather get Burrow or whichever guy slides here, and Burrow sliding right to us. We got the stack. Like, I feel good about that.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty happy to take Burrow here. Just give us a second to give us that extra breathing room, Zach, before
yeah. Go ahead. It's all good.
But no, Hurts did just go off the board a couple of picks before. I think he would have been interesting. I think it could have been interesting here to go with the 2 of them. We often like to draft the 2 quarterbacks in the quarterback window, and it would have been interesting to stack them up as well. But yeah, Joe Burrow certainly the option if you want to click that through. And then the second pick, looking at the options that are available, I do think that, and Devontae Smith actually went off 1 pick before he was the other secondary option I was going to select. Brandon Ayuk, I think, could be interesting here. I think the buzz on Sky Moore is obviously very high, but it might feel like a little bit early for him. Who else is sitting in there for you, maybe as a wide receiver option, Chris?
I feel like we can get a backdoor Trey Lance stack, so I would take Ayuk here. I wouldn't have minded taking Mitchell either. I know he's on top of the queue, but I think with the approach of taking Taylor so loftily, like, we don't need to take that second running back yet. But that's one where I'm trying to get a little more comfortable with, where it's like, hey, if you're making that bet on the Niners being there in week 17 and being viable, maybe Kittle doesn't get there to the same extent, but Mitchell picks up some of that slack. Like, there's ways you could talk me into that, but then you also still have to get a Raider somewhere. And then a lot of times for me, that ends up being people reach on Hunter Renfrow, people reach on Josh Jacobs. I end up taking then DeMarcus Robinson in the 18th just to get some share of the Raiders. And that's where it gets a little bit thorny sometimes with that Niners stack.
How are you feeling about that, Zach, so far now as we run through the team so far and how things are playing out here for?
I'm just trying to get over the trauma of making sure I'm making these picks on time before we time out and end up with a player who we don't want.
You see the beads of sweat pooling on Zach's face.
Yeah, like we had 8 seconds left on the clock, and Colm was like, "Who do you want, Chris?" I'm just like, "Dude, we got to pick someone." But no, I just barely squeezed in Ayuk there. Overall, I like the roster. One thing that, and Chris has mentioned a lot of it. I can't do it quite at the moment, but he's mentioning kind of just making sure that we're being conscious of the, essentially the playoff stretch of this tournament. So I do kind of have a little image pulled up here that I've just been doing my best to be at least a little bit aware of here. But certainly kind of making sure that we have those stacks later on for the tournament, assuming that, this team is making the playoffs. We want to be able to run deep into that. So being aware of that, I think, is definitely valuable to it. I like our roster overall. I think that picking out of the 101 has its benefits of getting someone like Jonathan Taylor or Cooper Kupp or what have you. But some of these wide receivers, like, you're probably forced to reach on some of these guys if you actually want to get players who you like and feel good about, rather than just strictly drafting by ADP. I think breaking from ADP a little bit here is kind of necessary in order to build teams that you still feel good about. We've seen that with our last couple of picks with Ayuk and Bateman, roughly 9 picks ahead of ADP for each of those guys. But overall, I like the way the team's looking, so I'm not against doing that. Sometimes you definitely have to get a little bit off of consensus in order to make these things work, depending on where you're picking from.
Yeah, and I think as well, like, there's a couple of these picks where somebody has gone like a Devontae Smith who would have been interested in 1 pick before. But in this particular draft, I think we've really skated the edge of being in the 101 and how these wide receivers have come. I know we've taken some of these guys ahead of ADP, like Bateman, who we kind of wrapped in there in a very rapid fashion. But when we look at the guys who are going after, again, the likes of Brandon Ayuk, like Adam Thielen, like Hopkins, who is suspended for the first portion of the season, both veteran guys. And we've Hunter Renfrow, who now is in with Devontae Adams. We've Sky Moore, who's coming in as a rookie. I think is going to be fantastic. But I'm looking at the profiles again. And Brandon Ayuk's season last year at the first kind of, I think, 6 weeks or so, couldn't have went any worse at that point. And then when we look at how the season finished off, it really pushed on. So he's dealing with Deebo Samuel, obviously, there. But I do think that Brandon Ayuk's still an ascending talent in the NFL. A number of points come in after we were talking about Amari Cooper from Derek Brown and from Jennifer, and they're talking about drafting the real wide receiver one later in the draft from Cleveland. That is David Njoku. But I'm the person that I'm targeting that offense this year is Bell. I think as a rookie, he could be a fun player to have on your rosters. But we are circling back around again. Trey Lance did go off the board at the start of this round, along with Dalton Schultz and TJ Hawkinson. But as we look at some of the options now, as Zach slots some guys into the queue.
Also, don't mind some of these players in this queue. I'm just kind of prepping them up for a little bit later on. So don't think I want David Njoku in this round, please.
Are you using that to people who are watching and along with us, so they don't snipe us, or what's the plan there? But
yeah, I just making sure that
we got sniped pretty heavy on Trey Lance there, like going ahead of Tom Brady. Like I thought Lance was going to fall to us for sure. We'd get that QB2 done, and nope, not in this room apparently.
Yeah. The guy I did check on that. The guy who took him had Debo, so I guess they felt the reach was there for that. But yeah, I was kind of surprised to see that one as well. But we're up here. Who do you guys like? I have Pollard at the top of the queue, who I definitely don't hate here at this spot. But what are you guys thinking?
I would pick Singletary over Pollard. He's somebody who's about 9 picks ahead of ADP. How are you feeling on Devin Singletary versus Tony Pollard? Is there any other running backs? I think this is a good spot, unless we take Garrett Wilson and probably lean into running back here.
Yeah, you could talk me into Pollard here. I'm comfortable with that. I also don't mind going to a second tight end here. Like we could get Goddard and have that, second Philly guy. And I know bully tight end. I was reading the article on RotoViz today about that. And I've been kind of landing there a little bit more. But yeah, I like Pollard just because he's leverage against, a higher ADP Zeke and certainly can get there. And I feel like now, I guess the question I have for you guys is relative to ADPs we're taking here, how far are you willing to reach? Because I know there were some Hayden Winks articles talking about not going past 12 picks for there's a real delta before it falls off.
Yeah, well, I think we're on this one. I think go Singletary here with the second pick, unless you're going with Wilson.
Singletary.
You've got a mess.
I have so much Singletary.
We got Wilson, but we had Pollard, so I removed Singletary from the queue because we took.
I think you were safe from yourself there, Colm. I think that was one of those. You don't want Singletary that far ahead of ADP. He might fall to us anyway.
I don't think. I think looking at the ADP queue, he was at the bottom of that ADP queue when we were sitting there. We'll see where he goes. Maybe I have misinterpreted that. But Zach, you're going to. We need to get those fingers working faster for these live drafts when we're doing them over the next couple of weeks.
I was taking out too much air on that one. Poor Zach is frantic.
Hey, we got 30 seconds for picks, y'all.
I can't believe Tony Pollard got in there ahead of Devin Singletary. I know by ADP that is the way he's going, but yeah, I think Singletary's in a prime spot this year. I think it's going to be interesting. But the other player there, I think if he comes back to us and Singletary's gone, I'm going to take shares of both running backs this year with Cook as well in that backfield. We were on the clock when you mentioned the question, Chris. If you want to go back and we'll circle back to that. If you want to,
how far ahead of ADP are you willing to take guys? Because I think Hayden and Josh over at Underdog are certainly doing the best they can with the the data that they have. Same data that anybody of us could pull up if we wanted, but did show some pretty noteworthy graphics about if you take a pick 12 spots of ADP, it basically substantially gets less valuable. And I guess what is the threshold for you guys? Because I'm honestly surprised to see you guys reaching as much as possible. And for me, it's more, how far should I be pushing this in my drafts?
So my take on that is always that I'm going to have a list of players that I like basically in each round or each round range, and I'm going to be targeting them. So it might be to my detriment, but the likes of, say, Adam Thielen or Amari Cooper, I'm probably going to have very little to zero of those on my rosters this year. Whereas the likes of Brandon Ayuk or Garrett Wilson, the rookie players or the second-year players, or AJ Brown, for example, I'm going to take the risks on their talent, being what produces this year. So players like I'm a Green Bay Packers fan, but in the last round, the 8th round, we had Alan Lazard and MVS, former Packer, go off the board. And, those guys 2 months ago, I know the situation for them both has changed, but they were going in the 18th and 19th round of drafts over at the FFPC and at Underdog, and now they've jumped up to there. And I think that's just overreaction to what we're expecting them to do this year. Like Russell Gage has gone there at a pick, and I think he's going to be in a good spot with Tom Brady. But there's players going in certain points of drafts that I just have no interest in drafting them. So then when it comes to somebody like Bateman, I'm willing to take, and it's usually going to be around. Probably learned my lesson last year with Laviska Shenault. Probably overreached on him far too many times. But as Zach will probably talk later in the draft, I'm definitely coming away with a lot of shares from this year as we hope that the bounce back does happen. But yeah, that's my approach. What about you, Zach, in terms of reaching for players? I think that the value of a player at his current ADP is one thing. And if you do get them a little bit after ADP, that's fantastic. But, taking a player because his ADP is 7 picks ahead of the other player, I think can be something that you're just, and that's kind of what happens when you end up with those running backs in the dead zone versus specifically targeted running backs and things like that. So I'm going for the profiles and the talent versus the overall ADPs. What about you, Zach?
Yeah, we're 5 picks up here. Let me pull this up real quick, but I'm with you as well. I think that we become pretty focused on profile overall for players here at RotoViz and wanting to make sure that we're really landing guys who have the talent that we feel good about. So in terms of that, if the ADP is right enough, I think I'm willing to reach on them. I'm definitely trying to keep it within a round. I don't want to go and take someone like David Bell in the 11th round because I like the fact that he almost had 3 straight 1,000-yard receiving seasons at Purdue and might be the wide receiver 2 on Cleveland. Like, I'm not getting crazy with it, but in terms of looking at the player and combining profile with situation, maybe factoring in draft capital, if there's within like that 1 round range, if it's a little bit ideally less than that, then that's what I'm going for. But I'm fine with making the reaches where I think they're necessary if it helps lead to an overall strong roster construction. Speaking of rosters, we are on the clock here in 2 picks. We have nobody in the queue. They were all taken. So what do we want to do here?
The players that I would be interested in here, and we'll see what you think. There's Rashad Penny, there's Rondell Moore, there's Pat Fairmouth. I can't see the queue. We still just have the 1 tight end. We didn't take tight end when we mentioned Goddard. So Fairmouth would be somebody I'd be interested in targeting here. The other players that I'd be interested in are Rondell Moore and Rashad Penny.
I would go Fairmouth for the week 17 correlation with Bateman.
Let's go. All
right,
that's why we have you here, Chris.
I'm letting that time out because we want to make sure we get this other pick here. Yeah. So we're going to go Freiermuth at the top of the queue. Who else do we want? We do need another quarterback, so we could do something like Tua. It's getting kind of gross out there. We don't have a lot of correlations with it at the moment in terms of any kind of stack. Zach Wilson would be a stack later on, but that really sucks.
Yeah, I'm holding. I'm not on the Deshaun Watson draft camp this year. I don't know how you guys are feeling. He's probably like the best player to draft here, but I'm going to stay away from it.
I'm fine with that.
But Rondell Moore would probably be my option because we have taken 2 running backs, but Rashad Penny would be my favorite kind of 0 RB candidate here.
Yeah, I would go Moore or Penny, whichever you guys prefer.
Let's go Moore.
All right. Yeah. We'll get him. All right, we got Moore. Nice.
Yeah, I mean, with Watson, the issue too is like, we passed on Amari Cooper at that 1 point. So at that, in that sort of way that you approach that, in my mind, at least, it's like, okay, we made a bet that Amari Cooper is not going to be great. So how's Deshaun Watson going to be great? That means he throws more to Bell and Njoku. Now those guys are gone. So like at this point for us, like, what's the point of taking Watson? Like, you're not drafting like you're right at that point.
Yeah, and I do think Watson's a fantastic quarterback, extreme talent, but yeah, just something that I'm not interested in this year based on the off the field stuff, and as well as that, there could be a Roman suspension coming down the pipeline here, and I think obviously that's why he's going where he is. If there was no suspension, I think he's probably going in the top 6 to 8 quarterbacks in terms of ADP. But yeah, Rondell Moore just did that there, Zach, over Rashad Penny, just for the fact that you took Tony Pollard over Devin Singletary, so we had to get things back on track. But in terms of there's a good review here so far of how the draft is playing out for us in terms of the candidates for 0 running back teams this year. I still think Tony Pollard is valid as an option, but he hasn't just ever got the full run with Zeke there. And even though Zeke's getting older, I still think there's question marks around how much Pollard's going to get out of that. But when we look at Devin Singletary, there's a rookie obviously come in with Kenneth Walker ahead of him, and it's interesting. With Penny, yeah, Cook's come into Buffalo, but Penny was on my mind. He's come in, or Walker's come in with Penny there as well. So I think they're both guys who are being a little bit undervalued by ADP. We're getting a little bit of a discount based on how they finished off the season last year. And you mentioned earlier in the show, Connor O'Driscoll, his team winning the FPC tournament. Our team came second in that, but we did have that really powered by Devin Singletary and Rashad Penny, and I think they're still going to be very valid. And when we're looking at these, we want to have players who score weekly, but we also want to have those players with the profiles to have those massive spike weeks as well. So they're all fitting in. But when we look at the players going in this range, even the likes of a Chase Edmonds, Rashad White fits in there, Ronald Jones fits in there. Melvin Gordon, I think, is an interesting pick this year as well, as much as we want Javonte Williams' big breakout to happen this year. There's a lot of players in this kind of 8 through 14 range, I think, that are very valid for if you do go zero running back. But when we have gone with this team and we've taken Jonathan Taylor, if we didn't have Jonathan Taylor in this draft, I think that would have flipped me onto a running back with that Rondell Moore pick. But because we have Taylor, I'm waiting a little bit longer.
Is there a number of running backs you're looking to get if you do get Taylor at the 101? Because it feels like you could it's still going to be variable depending on when you take that second running back. But is there like an overall number you're trying to hit, or is it just kind of a general feel for how the room's breaking?
I think for me, it's gonna depend definitely a little bit on how the room's breaking. But then also, I'm probably set to somewhere with Jonathan Taylor. Like, if I had that elite running back, I'm still probably not wanting to get any less than like 5 running backs. I know that some people like to do the more fragile builds and go with that like 4 running back build when they know that they have the elite anchor up top. I kind of like to cushion my floor just a little bit more with adding that 5th guy who I think could maybe bring something to my team a little bit later on down the road. But I'm not so much just set to a hard number as I am still wanting to make sure that between roster construction and then also a couple players slipping, if those players slip, I'm not going to stop myself from taking them.
Yeah, I think as well, if you start off and you have Taylor and then you maybe in those first 3 or 4 rounds, you do go with a hyper fragile approach and you have, say, 3 running backs in those first 4 rounds, say, I'm going to be waiting them and finishing with 4. You've put your talent into the running backs. If they don't work, your team's bust. But if you're in a team where you've taken 1, you're obviously less than that. But if you go 0 running back, obviously you're trying to take more shots later in the draft. So I think I would be going 4 to 5 in this particular draft. Yeah. The other question I was going to ask as well is with the tight end position, it's a good time to get into structural conversation. We have 2 tight ends, I think, at this point. I'm willing to...
They're both on week 9 bye, just so you know, Freiermuth and Kittle.
Fantastic. You could have told us that before we drafted Freiermuth, couldn't you? Only joking. But jump back here to the queue to see what our options are, to see who we're interested in here.
I've got one guy in here right now. I'll tell you real quick after this pick is made. One guy who I would like to take here is Tyler Algier, if anyone's open to that. And then,
I got a lot of Algier, so you're not going to talk me out of it. At this point, though, I don't know if I'm buying into the dream. Like Cordero Patterson's going so far behind ADP that it's easier to talk yourself in there. But I like Algier a lot.
Yeah, I think he fits, again, talking about profiles and upsides, I think he does fit into this build as the 3rd running back. The other thing I was going to say is, I know you've Matt Ryan in the queue. I'm willing to go and jump in and take Tua here if there's any interest from Chris in it. I think that, I'm not the biggest Tua fan, but I think the slander has gone a little bit far in terms of, I don't think the social media team down there in Miami are doing him any favors with these.
He'd be a solid value here in terms of ADP.
Yeah, rushing upsides there too. Like I'm perfectly fine with that. It would be nice, I think, if we had taken Parker just for another Week 17 correlation for Miami, New England. But Tua as a standalone QB just to make sure we're not getting total shit seems like a pretty reasonable move.
And I had Ryan in the queue because I didn't think Tua was going to fall. What was it, 15 spots, 13 spots past ADP. So Ryan was kind of my like backup to knowing that we weren't going to get Tua, and then thinking that we could at the very least have something of a Ryan Taylor stack, as unsexy as that is. But the quarterbacks are not great at this point in time. So assuming that we didn't get Tua, I think I probably would have preferred Ryan over some of these other guys we have here. Maybe Tannehill a little bit later on wouldn't have been so bad either. But yeah, you're kind of like Ryan with Taylor.
You're really looking through. If you just jump back to the QB queue for me, like we're into a really, like, it's Jameis Winston, Zach Wilson, Matt Ryan, Daniel Jones, Ryan Tannehill, Mac Jones, Jared Goff. I think prior to the trade of AJ Brown, I think Tannehill at that point is an absolute bargain. I also think that at this point, I think his ADP is like way too low for what you're getting there with him based on efficiency. But at this point, you're looking for upside and rushing. Like even Tannehill will bring a little bit of rushing, but the likes of a Zach Wilson heading into his 2nd season, I would be shooting for the upside there versus, kind of what people might think as kind of certainty with other players. But I think Tua, there's still room to grow there. And you touched on the rushing side of it. I think you're trying to get those quarterbacks that, like we've seen in the past, you don't have to be a good NFL quarterback to be a good fantasy quarterback. And I think maybe Tua fits a bit of that mold as well. But that, I think that's going to, like, for me, that's us finalized at quarterback. I was going to say before that pick, we were finalized at tight end, but the buys have dug a little bit of a hole for us there. So I guess we're going to have to get a 3rd tight end here at some point. There is some late guys that I do like. So we won't mention them because we don't want to get sniped here 4 rounds ahead of ADP on them. But anyone now, as we start to solidify this roster, that you're interested in trying to get over these last kind of 4 to 5 rounds, Chris?
a big run of wide receivers here. I mean, overall, I genuinely like to take some of the rookie running backs late. Just, I think the Keontae Ingram thing, it's got a little bit less appealing with Darrell Williams being there. And he's a guy too that the ADPs for him are insane. Like I've seen people take him in the 110 spot or like the 110 overall like pick area. And that seems crazy to me when you can still get him in the 17th or 18th round in some rooms. But I think Hassan Haskins would have some appeal to me, a guy who, if we're saying Derrick Henry might break down, Hassan Haskins could theoretically be Derrick Henry by the time December rolls around. I'm also willing to take some of the tight end flotsam out there if we are going to try to get that third tight end because of the bye weeks. Like I think, Austin Hooper to me is undervalued. And I think your Tannehill stack, like get Treylon Burks and Hooper, like that's, or, Woods and Hooper or Woods and Burks, like really low ADP combinations for Tannehill. So I wouldn't mind trying to backdoor stack something here, but I know you feel like we're set at QB. So I'm willing to follow the room.
Yeah, you never know how things play. Sometimes it is a case, you talked earlier about reaching for players, but sometimes things can really just deteriorate quickly on you. For example, the wide receiver run in the middle of this round, which was 7 picks deep, and then we have an 8th one that has gone since that. Now, some of those guys I'm sure that we are interested in, like David Bell was in there, for example, but sometimes your plans could get completely scuppered by a run like that, and you may have to change it up to a different position. But when we're looking here and we have a question mark coming in to see if Brevin Jordan is one of the options, we'll see as we get later into the draft who might be available. But when we're looking here, Zach, anyone that you're interested in slotting us into the queue? I know we like to have an empty queue as we get ready to pick, but anyone that's intrigued?
Yeah. Don't worry. I have 3 guys in here right now. I'm a little worried that a couple of them are going to go. I do regret to inform you that I know that we like David Njoku in this room. We logically cannot take him if the idea is to draft a tight end to fix our bye week woes for week 9. And Njoku also has a week 9 bye, so we can't take him just by what we actually need. There's a couple of players who I do like right now. Where are we on the clock? We're 7 picks away. I'm hesitant to pull up the queue right now because I don't want anyone taking anything that we like. I know that we do have a tight end in here that Colm will like, and we'll get the RotoViz.
We'll let it run, then we'll keep the suspense building. But some of the players who have gone off the board in the last couple of picks, KJ Hamler's one of our favorite targets to try and get, but he's gone there, and that's somebody who I would have been targeting. Robbie Anderson, I think, is interesting at the point of the drafts that he's going at the moment. But yeah, I think overall, you touched on something, and it is Njoku, and it is the tight end contracts. This is something that I think, like, I haven't talked a lot about it, but I feel I need to vent a little bit. How are these tight ends getting so much money based on I did a tweet. I took a picture of David Njoku's stats, and like over the last couple of years, it's like wide receiver 6 numbers maybe, and these guys are getting lovely contracts. I don't know how it's happening around the entire NFL. But yeah, the tight end market, I think, is definitely overpaid, as Njoku does go off the board, as I made that comment. So let's fire up some of the conversation around who we may take at this point. I see there is a star beside Noah Fant. There's a star beside Gus Edwards. Who are some of the other names standing out for you here as we are on the clock? And I'll let Chris go.
We can get both these guys right now, but is there anyone else you want besides Edwards or Fant?
I like Everett as well, but I'm happy to go Fant if that's the way we want to go. I would take the.
I'm always a Noah fan. I believe Drew Locks could win that starting job and bring him to glory. So
let's go.
Let's time out on Fant, and then we can marinate on Edwards for a second here.
Well, let's make sure you make the pick.
Yeah, Fant will time out. He should time out on us.
We know that. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I on the other page you can't see it, but I'm correcting on the other queue.
It's like we're gonna time out.
Is that the way it's going to work here for us?
So we're good there.
So then on the second pick, I do like some of the running backs here. I like as well as Tarian Price as well. I think it's interesting. But who are we looking at? I do think we can add in a running back option here. Have you a preference out of the guys that are sitting there?
I think either of those two would work for me.
Let's go Gus here. Let's do it. I think the Ravens are still going to just be that high volume rushing attack. Like it's setting up. My concern with Gus Edwards right now is honestly that it kind of sounds like there may not be the best of reports for either him or Dobbins in terms of potential camp readiness, but it's been a while now. I'm hoping that by the time the season actually rolls around, they'll be good to go. If not, maybe Mike Davis or Tyler Beatty is a sneaky value late in drafts to start off the season, but I'd like to think that at the end of the day, Gus Edwards is going to be the RB2 on the Ravens and having a relatively good role there. So I like Gus. I'm good with that.
I can't believe it's just every running back I've mentioned today, Zach has gone just in the opposite direction. It seems like there's a conspiracy here. But
I'm finally breaking out against you, Colm. I'm done pretending.
You can't have the controls anymore. Can't let him have the controls.
That would actually be funny, Zach, if you were just like, yeah, what do you think about this one, Colm? Yeah, never mind. Let's go this way instead.
Yeah. Oh, you like him? Big mistake.
Not today. So but I'm really enjoying how it's going. I think we probably, like we talked about earlier, I think we need to get we've three picks left to go. I think we need to get one running back in there. I think getting Fant has solidified our tight ends. Anything else, Zach? I'll let you go with the overall build that you think that we need to be adding in here, and we'll keep the targets out of it for a minute because it feels like there's some sniping potential coming on in these late and the late rounds in particular. I think people can be like, go with the ADP or else take wild swings, and a lot of the time I'm in the wild swings.
Yeah, just to make sure. So real quickly here, just so I know what we're throwing in the queue. We're good on quarterback, tight end. I think we're mutually agreeing on that right now.
I am, unless Chris wants to make a pitch for, is Drew Lock still on the board?
I mean, like, you never go wrong with a luxury Drew Lock pick, but no, I think the tight ends and quarterbacks we have seem good enough for me.
Okay.
Yeah, there's lots of comments coming in here from about Drew Lock. So the price is always right.
The thing with Drew Lock, and I'll make the case real faster.
Even Chris is commenting on here.
So the thing with Drew Lock is that what happens with him when he's on the field is he takes deep shots and he runs the ball. For fantasy, these are the two things that matter to me when looking at quarterbacks the most. Zach Wilson also has some similar profile things. Justin Fields did. These guys didn't work out last year, but I think that's why if you want to go back to the well this year, that's there. But if you look at Drew Lock, like compare Drew Lock's numbers for his first 3 years, let's say, to Josh Allen's first year, there's going to be alarming similarities. And I think he's not going to get to the level of Josh Allen. We've kind of seen that progression, I think, advance beyond. But I just think at a certain point, if you're a fantasy player and there's easy stacks to get to, like that Jets Seahawks stack, like that could be a 50-point total by the time week 17 rolls around. And I think that's something where people just talk themselves into like, oh, this isn't going to happen. And maybe you're right. Like 95% of the time, Drew Lock fails. But what about that 5% of the time? Like, and I think that's enough where if you have your 5% shares of Drew Lock or 10%, even if you want to hedge with some Geno somewhere or whatever, like that's fine. But I just think overall, like people just really talk themselves with these binary outcomes, and it's ultimately on a scale of probabilities. And Drew Lock, I think, has a 5% chance to be like a Josh Allen bootleg version West Coast.
Yeah, no, and look, I was joking as well. I do think that, and I think something you mentioned there is really valuable. Is some people will just take players. Range of outcomes of the upside is very, very high with him. We have seen him in that Browns or in the Broncos offense, and we've seen Teddy Bridgewater. And in terms of fantasy production, it's much better to have the guy who's going to throw it downfield. And he's also there at the moment. Maybe there'll be trades in that, but at the moment with Lockett and Metcalf, who are both great down the field, and if he's airing the ball out, getting those air yards, I think there's going to be some weeks, particularly in best ball, where he's going to slot in there as your QB1. So yeah, I like to make jokes, but yeah, definitely still somebody who could be valid if you're waiting late on those quarterback positions. So you mentioned, Zach, there's some players you're interested in here. Let's shout out a few of the guys that you're tempted by as we're 3 picks away.
Yeah, so the one I went ahead and threw in the queue just because Chris mentioned him earlier was Hassan Haskins. He's probably not coming back to us, so I went ahead and put him in there just as someone maybe we consider taking. We recently hit another decent wide receiver run, so some guys who I had in the queue there. Not so excited about him now. One other guy who I'm taking perhaps a little bit too much of, but I'm probably drinking the Kool-Aid that they're giving out here in Washington, is the idea that Brian Robinson is going to be the Jonathan Stewart, D'Angelo Williams combo with Antonio Gibson. So I've been drafting a lot of Brian Robinson, where I think even if he's getting like some short yardage goal line situations, that maybe he falls into a couple double-digit weeks, even if he's not seeing massive volume. And then if something ever happens to Gibson, I think Robinson is kind of the lock to become the lead back for Washington. So I do like Brian Robinson. We got, that'd be 3 of our 5 running backs in on a week 14 bye, which is a little bit rough, but not terrible here. And then we can look at wide receivers, but I would like to go one running back here one way or another.
I think we give the guest the priority, and if Haskins is there, I think we take a stab at that.
Look, if Zach put him in the queue, I'm willing to take him. I feel good about him, and I think we got 3 real guys here who we know are going to be in the mix to play snaps with Taylor. Obviously, is going to hopefully carry us a lot. Pollard, Edwards. I definitely got a little rookie overzealous at certain parts of the May draft period, just because these guys' ADPs could go up, but we have enough floor with running back that I think taking Haskins.
Yeah, so
we have no wide receivers in here, but wide receivers gross, so we need to take someone.
Well, the one that I would be interested in is probably going to be James Washington. Anyone else make a pitch for a different wide receiver?
That works for me.
Yeah, Washington was who I was actually going to suggest. So let's get him, and then we're officially on the one pick left here, which is obviously going to be a number of ways we can go. What do you guys think about Justin Ross right now? Like I was looking the other day at the one thing I'll say
about Justin Ross is we have two videos up on the YouTube channel. The two highest watched videos are both about Justin Ross. One that he's going to be a superstar, and the other that he's going to get cut. So yeah, Justin Ross will do great numbers for anyone that's posting content. But
yeah,
I'm nearly afraid to post any more after the volume of comments that come in on those. So I think that there's a lot of buzz. Obviously, there's a lot of hype. The Chiefs seem to be getting them, into their social media stuff to keep that buzz going. It feels like with all that happening, there's a very big chance that he does, at minimum, make the practice squad and probably makes the roster. But you're still fighting a real uphill battle in terms of all the players that they have there and all the money they've invested. And realistically, if you go undrafted, it's very hard to make an impact, in year one, specifically, in the season in a meaningful way in those opening weeks of the season. So definitely, though, if he's cleared and he's healthy, I think the upside is extremely, extremely high for him. The concern is if he doesn't make it with the Chiefs, they were willing to take a shot on him. The reports that a lot of other teams didn't want to take him and clear him from a medical perspective. So the problem is going to be if he doesn't make the Chiefs roster, what happens after that? So there's a lot of risk, I think, baked into drafting him. But when, again, going back to profiles, like somebody who went in that last round that I really like is Wendell Robinson. Then like the players going after that, like Justin Ross went ahead of our pick, but Amari Rodgers did nothing last year for the Packers. You have Marvin Jones, who's a aging veteran receiver. We have Laviska Shenault, who I will be drafting, but didn't really do a lot last year. But then you're into kind of a lot of mixed territory. And even in this range, you're getting like Devin Duvernay, Paris Campbell. I think it's a fair range in terms of him, if he hits, been better than a lot of those guys that I'm after naming out. Like AJ Green goes in that same range as well. So what are your thoughts, Chris? Is he somebody that you're like, I'm really rooting for him, but I'm not actively trying to draft him onto my rosters, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think the draft capital thing is an important note where, like, even the Athletic article, there was one that I saw was basically the Chiefs training camp or OTAs so far and how they're looking. And they were saying MVS is standing out the most so far. But, like, there's still Sky Moore doing things, Justin Ross doing things. But it's such a deep receiver room overall that I think if you're really making heavy bets on any of these guys, like besides Travis Kelce, you kind of have to be prepared for that to be something that can go wrong. And taking an undrafted rookie receiver in the 16th round, like if you get him in the 18th, fine. But I think people reaching for him, you're buying in the buzz at that point instead of following the draft capital. Like Sky Moore went very high, Justin Ross did not. Sky Moore is probably going to get pushed ahead of him because that's just the way that goes. They also made other signings. Like I find it hard to believe, and I think your point, Colm, is dead on to me. Like that, if you're expecting to be there, like that's just not knowing how NFL kind of cap mechanics and roster building works. And that's the mistakes people make, I think, at this point that probably get solidified by July. But then if you're taking Justin Ross now, like you're buying in the moon, you're buying Bitcoin at $80,000 and you want to buy it at 30,000.
That's an interesting way to put it, actually. But yeah, I do think that like there is as well going to be those absolute exceptions to the rule that, he comes in, he breaks out. But anytime something like that happens, people will say like this undrafted player did it this one time and this is exactly why it will happen again. Whereas that's the exception to the rule. And it feels like, the other profiles in the draft capital plays a massive part. And I just think that the chances could be a little bit slimmer for him, but really rooting and hoping that he gets there. But we are into the last round. We have one pick left here. Some players going off the board that I've been targeting in this range, but I think we should still have a couple of different options. Who's your favorite player to try and get in this, with specifically the last pick, but in the last round, Chris?
I mean, this is getting blood dry pretty bad. Danny Gray going is one that I don't mind. Zamir White. A lot of these guys that are going right now are the ones that you can talk me into late. Chris Evans going ahead of Samaje Perine. I don't know that I'm buying as much. Like if you are going to take that, that handcuff back this late, I think Perine has shown that he's the number 2 and people again want to buy in on Chris Evans. Hope maybe he shares a name with Captain America. But I don't know. I need to see the queue because I feel like this really wide receiver got bled dry in this room more than I expected based on the amount of running backs going early.
Yeah. Wide receiver
it does come back to like people always say wide receivers deep, and that's why you can go running backs early in draft. Wide receivers not deep. There's specific players that you need to target, but you can see here with some of the names, like there's a lot of wide receivers have gone in the last 5 rounds, but there's not a lot to be excited about with that overall. But Who are you leaning towards here, Zach, as we are 2 picks away?
Well, I just spent the whole previous round saying that I've been taking a lot of Brian Robinson. Somehow he's fallen all the way down here to potentially the very last pick of the draft, which, I mean, I know we have five running backs spearheaded by Jonathan Taylor, but Brian Robinson I think would be really interesting here just based on ADP if the guys ahead of us didn't take him. Braxton Berrios I think is interesting if we wanted to get another wide receiver. We know those slot guys can give us points. And then as gross as it is, and I know Velus Jones is older than all of us combined, but the Bears seem to like him, and for just wanting to find those guys to take calculated guesses on, I think he's interesting. Quez Watkins kind of brings that deep threat, explosive playmaking ability as well. Brian Robinson here I think is actually really interesting.
Yeah, if you want to go 6 running backs, I'd support Brian Robinson. Sure,
I would lean towards Braxton Berrios, but if you want to take the pick, I'll not. You've taken whatever pick you've wanted all day long. So
and that's the thing. I knew this comment was coming. So we're going to take Braxton Berrios and just let Brian Robinson go completely undrafted because you said that earlier, Colm.
I do think though there's like a lot of value to Brian Robinson there. I don't think he should be going undrafted in these leagues. But that's the thing about when you're playing in 18 round leagues versus a 28 round league, for example, that you'll be in the deep drafts over at the FFPC. There's a lot of players who do go undrafted, and it's always interesting to track those because then they should be your priority targets in the 20th round. I haven't drafted Braxton Berrios all year, but I do think that he finished quite strong. I think there's a very young wide receiving core now and a very young team in general with the Jets, and I think he could be somebody who's interesting. And I'm trying to remember back. This is when things get foggy. I believe they give him a contract extension towards the end of last season, if I'm not correct. So there's someone involved there as well. So yeah, I think the Jets are going to be a lot better than people are expecting them to be with those players coming in, young players making second-year leaps like Zach Wilson, like Elijah Mitchell, and then obviously you pair that up with the young rookie wide receiver and the Bryce Halls there. They have Michael Carter who started off pretty decent. So yeah, I think it's going to be fun. Looking into the shout out to Paul Corcoran who says, great draft fellas, appreciate that. And then Jennifer says that she really digs her team. So I will say this, if we don't win this league and we don't go all the way and win it, we're rooting for you, Jen. We hope that your team goes a long way as well. So then Paul has mentioned that he didn't get as much week 17 correlation as he would like, but he feels good about his team as well. So those are things that I'm glad we had you here, Chris, today. Like I'm usually really interested in that. Things are going so fast and we're doing this live. Sometimes those can slip by. We've got a few correlations in there, but even, for example, the bye weeks, I know I mentioned that Zach's at the controls, but sometimes when you are drafting, you're on the clock and you're trying to do a podcast, you can kind of miss out on some of those things as well. So we did get, I think we have a pretty solid team there. I think particularly the first 10 rounds went really well. I always talk about the last, it's 8 rounds in this format, but that's really where these teams can be differentiated in terms of the success of the roster. There's a lot of blow-in picks usually in those rounds. Maybe we blew a few, but we'll see how it works out. But how do you feel, Chris, as we start to wrap things up here? How do you feel about that draft overall?
No, I feel good about it. I think we got some nice correlations. I think, you guys, the reaches that we took relative to ADP were guys that are younger and should be on the way up. I talk a lot on Splash Play, the show I do with Pete Overzet, about, the year 2, year 3 wide receiver leaps is like the biggest leaps that they'll make. And same things for QBs, not quite the same for running backs, but I think we got a lot of young guys here, a lot of value as well. So the one thing that kind of threw me for a loop is Raheem Mostert not getting drafted at all. And I might just be overexposed there. So now I'm a little bit of a sunken cost fallacy, but he should be getting drafted. Like I know Sonny Michel's there. There's enough guys, but man, like that, this room took a weird turn. And sometimes people, I think, get a little too into the 4D chess of it all.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Like when you mentioned that, and then, we were talking about potentially taking their rookie running back, quite a bit earlier. I think they're players that you should be taking shots at here as we get later into the draft. But yeah, I do think that's what, 18 roster spots. There is going to be players who slide by and don't get drafted. And then at the end of the season, you're going to be like, what's happening here? How did this guy go? Like, I know this is before we run in and we start drafting after the NFL draft and after the Russell Wilson trade. But we did a draft earlier this offseason at the FFPC, which is tight end premium. And I believe it was the 18th round that we took Okuabunaman before that. So yeah, sometimes these fun things happen as the ADP evolves. So yeah, overall, if you scroll back up to the top of that page, we'll give a shout through the entire team. It's Joe Burrow, Tua, then we have Jonathan Taylor, Tony Pollard, Tyler Algier, Gus Edwards, Hassan Haskins, T. Higgins, AJ Brown, Rashad Bateman, Brandon Ayuk, Garrett Wilson, Rondell Moore, James Washington, Braxton Berrios. And and then we have Kittle, Fairmouth, and Fant. I think that roster is stacked. I think that's a pretty good draft overall. So I think that's a pretty fun lineup. Hopefully it'll go a little bit of distance. Any players in there, we'll pick. Who's your least favorite player in there, Zach, on our roster outside of Braxton Berrios?
I was just gonna say it's Braxton Berrios. We should have taken Brian Robinson until I got harassed into Berrios. No,
my fear with these drafts is always like if this team's really good, but then like Brian Robinson is smashing it throughout the season, and Braxton Berrios is like sitting on IR for the whole season.
Yeah, luckily your DMs are open to me, so I can just let you know about that whenever I need to. I guess there would be one, and maybe we knew this, doing it ahead of time, or maybe I was the only one that was kind of aware of it, and I just thought we'd roll with it. But having George Kittle, I think normally I'd probably prefer George Kittle in a 2 tight end build rather than a 3 tight end build, but we kind of were forced into going with 3 tight ends because of the week 9 bye. Our tight end room is absolutely loaded. No one's going to complain about having Kittle, Freiermuth, and Fant in most drafts. If this was an FFPC draft, we'd be doing, dances right now probably or something. So our tight end room is loaded. I think normally though I'd still probably prefer on an underdog team 2 tight ends with someone elite like Kittle at the top there. And then I
will hold up. I think that one slid by. Just I didn't see the bye week at all for that one, so I think in hindsight.
And you guys wouldn't let that ride? Like you wouldn't let the 2 bye weeks at tight end at a 1Z position just deal with it for 1 week?
I actually have, so I would have been fine with doing that.
Pete's talking into that more, and I feel natural discomfort with that, but it is the sum of the work of the entire season, so I get it.
Yeah, like I would have been fine with just going with the 2 at the 9. I did a couple of those just this past week where I was like, I like the positions overall. Yeah, I'm gonna have to take a 0 at the tight end in week 9, but I think in theory, if the rest of my roster is playing up to snuff and how I expect it to, taking a 0 at the tight end position of all positions hopefully shouldn't be what buries me at the end of the season when it comes time to determine whether or not it'll be making the playoff portion of the tournament.
Yeah, you mentioned as well, like if it was at the FFPC, there's more flexibility with the roster spots and the flex spots, and then their tight end premium as well. So I think it works better there. But I'm not against it. But what kind of shuffles it for me is the overall construction. Then, like I would probably rather have an extra wide receiver or an extra running back. There's an interesting comment that did come in here from Jacob, and he mentions the Fairmouth pick is the only one that he doesn't like. He would have preferred Penny there. And sometimes what I like to do after these drafts
so would Colm.
Those 1v1 selections. But I do think that if we didn't take Fairmouth there and we took Penny, we probably then also have less need to go running back with some of the picks that maybe we're not as sold on at the running back position, and we could have probably filled up there a little bit more. But I think Fairmouth's going to have a big season. I think Kittle's going to have a big season, but I always have a few question marks just around Kittle and how much he's actually used in that offense. So if it's a case that they have the same bye week, but if it like sometimes in baseball, what you see is it'll match up that Kittle has a 17-point game 1 week where Fairmouth only has 5 points that week, and the following week, and vice versa. It can be them boom weeks, and you're starting the best off the 2 of them. So yeah, I think it's a pretty fun team, but yeah, I probably would have took Penny there as well. But I love Pat Fairmouth. Jennifer says she can't stop taking the Houston Jaguars week 17 correlation. It's just too easy and can be a shootout. So yeah, I think there's going to be, the thing is too, like sometimes when we're doing these shows, as that there, now we've talked about today, some people might watch and they start to bring those correlations in, and that's what doing this content's about, is opening people's eyes and their strategy to those things. So yeah, really fun. I just want to mention at the end of this, as we get ready to close it out, we might take, if anyone has any listener questions, fire them in. We will run through a couple of those. But Spags mentioned Splash Play podcast. Obviously him and Peter Overset. I'll give you, Dan, take a moment or two, and you can hit these. You can give yourself promotion better than I'll be able to give it.
Thank you, Colm. I appreciate it. No, I honestly, I'm excited to be on this channel. So first of all, I want to give the plug to RotoViz, because I think you guys have been doing a great job. And I'm really glad to see you guys, because I've been following RotoViz since I started over at Osmo many years back. And you guys do a great job kind of making this data easy to understand and easy to wrap your head around. And I know Drico was in the chat too, who I was giving a shout out to before. But like lots of great stuff at RotoViz. So that's the first plug. Make sure you're following everything. I love the way you guys are carving up the various formats, the strategies. Like that's what we're trying to do at my day job at Football Outsiders, is get better about combining sort of the approach and the data with the real football mechanics of it all. And I think RotoViz does that about as well as anybody. So make sure you're checking that out and subscribing to all that. Go check Splash Play. I'll do that every Monday and Thursday with Pete Overzet. We're also doing some solo streams where I'll be doing some best ball streams myself on Friday afternoons. So subscribe over on the YouTube, give us some love, and go check it out, because I think this is, here you're seeing a lot of the data, a lot of the serious stuff with really sharp guys like Colm and Zach here. But, for Splash Play, we try to mix that with the fun and silliness and just, Pete being mean to me over and over again. So different strokes for different folks out there in the best ball streams.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned, I love watching you and Pete doing it. Pete is, in my opinion, the funniest in the entire fantasy football space, but also one of the sharpest, I think, in terms of how you can read draft rooms and set things up. So yeah, definitely check that. Give that a subscribe as well over on YouTube. As I mentioned, we did hit 1,000 subscribers recently. So very much thank you to everyone who has subscribed. Make sure you check out that as well. I checked today, I believe you are heading towards that 1,000. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're getting there. It's weird because we do the show on Pete's channel, and now we're trying to rebuild the Splash Play channel up a little bit more. And it's great because the best ball community, I know you guys, I'm sure, play more than enough DFS too. I know Zach does, but the DFS community sucks. I like DFS. It's a lot of fun, but it's about as toxic as can be. Whereas best ball is hey, let's all have some fun. Week 17 court, let's all have a good time. And I think that's really where that's where you kind of separate yourselves, both as a YouTube channel for you guys, but also as a person who just enjoys content. Watch more best ball streams, support some of these creators that are out there doing this stuff, because it is about the most welcoming community that you can find.
Yeah, there is. I think that's what's so good is that people are kind of supporting each other. But I think the DFS element is that people are, I know you mentioned the RotoViz stuff, and for example, you mentioned Osmo, but I think there's a lot more when we look at season long, there's a lot more support to everyone can do this. When we look at weekly DFS, it's we're all fighting for the one pie here. We want to get the cash prize at the end of it. Whereas, we just every so often we're going to hit here. And you mentioned Draco. He obviously hit last year, and we're still getting over the effects of that, thanks to Jarvis Landry and Baker Mayfield not getting us over the line. But looking forward to this year. But no, I do think that the best ball community is a lot of fun, and I think part of that is just the explosive growth of it as well. And we're also hungry to get into these drafts. Drafting is extremely fun. In my opinion, drafting is the most fun part of season long as well. So if you can do that and then not have to manage your rosters, I think that's fantastic. So when we get ready to wrap things up, Zach, you teased an article earlier on the stream. I'll let you hit that again if you want.
Oh, yeah. Over at NBC Sports Edge, part 2 of my high-volume rushing quarterback articles. Last week, I looked at high-volume rushing quarterbacks and their impact on running backs for fantasy. This week, dropped on Monday, it was high-volume rushing quarterbacks and their impacts on wide receivers and tight ends for fantasy purposes. So you can head on over to NBC Sports Edge, check that out. Next week, I'll have a underdog-related article just for players who I'm targeting in the month of June, with that quickly approaching as of tomorrow. So definitely take a look at that. And, drop me a comment, any thoughts you may have on Twitter on the articles. Let me know what you think, whether or not you think it sucks or not. For him, just wildly wrong. Whatever. Just let me know. But it's over there for you to take a look at.
Yeah, definitely check that out. And Connor does shout out that Spags, you are the king. We do really appreciate you coming on today. This is the first kind of live stream that we've actually done on the RotoViz channel as a draft. We have done a lot of drafts and posted them up, myself and Zach, myself and Sean Siegel. But we will do some live ones as well like this every so often. We do also have the RotoViz Best Ball show, which is a relatively new podcast feed, but myself and Zach set up the show last year as kind of a short series where we don't evergreen content. People liked it, so we've its own feed now. We're doing a lot of content there. So I did two shows recently with Michael Dubner covering some of his articles. I did a recorded 3 shows yesterday with Connor O'Driscoll covering his recent series on rotoviz.com. So lots of stuff coming out. And then myself and Zach will have lots of content coming your way as well, including some of these drafts. So make sure you check out the RotoViz Best Ball Show podcast. Check out the entire podcast network. You mentioned that June is coming tomorrow, so we're ending May. We did hit that 1,000, which was a massive achievement, but we also had the most downloads we've ever had in a single month this past month on the RotoViz Radio Network side. And, quite an achievement when we think that we're in May. So those numbers hopefully will continue to rise as we head towards the...
People love football, man.
Yeah.
It's the one thing that I love about our show is people do want to talk about football in March. They want to talk about it in May. And that's the thing that, best ball really lends itself to. Whereas if you're just missing football, the USFL didn't quite do it. Just do some best ball draft, keep up with the news, and you'll be better prepared by the time the season actually comes along.
Absolutely. So as we do get ready to close it out here, you can check out Zach on Twitter at ZK_FFB. You can find out all his content there. Check out Chris on Twitter at Chris Spags. That is SPAGS. And then, of course, check out the Splash Play YouTube channel as well for more content similar to today, but you'll also get to see Pete take some shots at Chris as well while on it. But yeah, fun times. Really enjoyed it. Thank you very much for jumping on today, and hopefully we'll get to do it in the future. I mentioned at the start that I have wanted to do this for a long time, so I'm glad that we've got to draft together today. Hopefully we get to do more content over the coming months, and as always, thanks to Zach. My name's Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Overtime Ireland, and until we are back with another show, have a good one.